We live in a digital world now, and participating in the digital economy is an imperative for all. These videos are designed to help you quickly understand the key digital topics and the technologies in approximately 5 minutes. A number of 2017 industry analyst reports indicated that many organizations are not really progressing fast enough with leveraging digital technologies for business value. McKinsey and Company indicated that less than 40% of organizations are digitized. Dynatrace, in a survey of over 1,200 organizations, found 48% of survey participants indicated digital performance challenges were hindering their success in their digital transformation. A 2017 OECD study for the G20 meeting on the key issues for digital transformation indicated that 50% of organizations experience one or more of the challenges we shall shortly present, slowing down their participation in the digital economy. A review of industry reports and studies, as you can see here, from leading analysts and digital leaders, comes up with a pretty consistent list of the top challenges that limit or slow digital transformation. We shall take a look at these now. Lack of a clear vision and strategic intent relating to leveraging digital for business value is a limiting factor in setting the direction and focus for the organization. Lack of knowledge and competence that gives leaders the confidence to set the right vision and plan, and for other stakeholders the ability to productively contribute in the transformation. Attitudes towards existing systems and technology presents a barrier to new technology adoption, whether it be sunk cost or emotional investment, or perceived technical challenges such as integration and interoperability. Performance management and return on investment visibility is an issue, where organizations are not experiencing the impact of their technology investment. Lack of focus on the customer and their digital engagement and journey in the acquisition of your organization's products and services, another important issue that slows down digital transformation. Inertia at all levels. At the highest level, the perception of risk that significant change to the business or business model might bring, right down to the operational level where fear of the unknown and what might be the consequences of digital transformation for the individual or teams. Digital transformation can enable and require culture change. Digital has the potential to change how individuals live and work. The traditional approach to projects or operations is generally sequential: plan, design, build, test, operate, sometimes called waterfall. The approach is to build all at once. The scope of what is to be delivered is outlined in a requirements or product specification document. The plan produces a work breakdown schedule from this requirements document. This leads to cost and time estimates to deliver. The plan is then executed to produce the documented requirement scope. There are some downsides to this approach. Documented or contracted requirements are often fixed and mandatory. Though some methods allow for nice-to-have requirements, these have a much higher probability of not being delivered. Changing the requirements needs to be tightly managed, and often changes are disruptive and costly. The requirements are assumed accurate and factually correct in detail, in that they reflect the future deliverable, meeting some future need. Development or production focus on getting the documented features and functions built rather than the usefulness of the investment at a point in time. There are usually undocumented implicit requirements where the provider may make assumptions on the customer needs, which can be incorrect. Let us now look at the life cycle of this plan-driven approach. On the left of the screen, you can see the investment effort to deliver over the timeline of the plan. On the right-hand side, you can see the value the customer experiences over the life of the plan. We use the analogy of a marathon for this approach. For certain projects, especially major infrastructural projects, this approach is often more appropriate. In the case of digital transformation, for example, major backbone or infrastructural investments should consider this as an approach or some iterative version of it. At the start of the process, the customer and provider agree to plan to deliver the target outcomes. The provider or supplier can start to execute the plan to design, build, test, and deliver. Time starts to pass and the customer maintains an expectation that all is well and that they will receive what they asked for at some time in the future, that they have agreed. As further time passes, the customer may be wondering how is progress against the plan, or the supplier may be wondering, is this what the customer really wants? So a progress review is scheduled. Often during these reviews, issues are identified and changes requested, with frequent debates around whether they were actually a change from the original requirements or not. The customer may restate their requirements differently to how the supplier interpreted them. The passage of time may have led to more clarification or learning that better informs the real requirements, leading to changes being identified. Ultimately, the review leads to change requests, replanning, and re-estimation. Frequently, this requires rework to completed work, and thus additional effort, cost, and time. It can also create tension within the relationships between the customer and the supplier. Budget and schedule come into more focus and under pressure. The change review cycle we have just discussed is often repeated over the period of the project. As time and review cycles pass, the budget and the estimated completion dates often need to be extended. At a point in time, we normally reach where there is agreement to release and deliver to the customer. Now the customer has the output or product, they can now experience the value. Frequently, this experience does not meet the original expectations. What does an agile approach look like? It's all about building a little at a time and customer engagement in planning and reviewing each bit delivered. When we reviewed the plan-driven sequential approach earlier, we identified that the key constraint was the scope of the requirements. This is what was fixed. We then adjusted the cost and time, often each having to trade off against each other to accommodate the scope. In Agile, we fix short time slots called sprints, and the customer and provider teams decide what should be delivered for each time slot or sprint on the basis of their priority and value. In Agile sprints, we adjust the scope to fit the time and cost available for each sprint. A key Agile technique for managing the scope and the requirements is the use of user story cards, jointly produced by the provider and customer teams. These cards represent the requirements in a short but effective manner focused on value. Each card has the following content. The beneficiary, often described as the actor, user, or customer, their name and or their role. We get them to state what is it they need in the terms of a goal or a task or activity. We also get them to state why they need it so that we understand the benefit and the value of this particular need. It could be a low-level detailed feature or function. The team then set the priority and do a rough estimate as to what it would take to develop and deliver that particular user story card. The inventory of unactioned cards is referred to as the backlog. New user story cards can be created and added to the backlog at any time. This facilitates changes. without the overhead. At the start of each sprint, the customer and provider review the backlog, prioritize and select the user stories that they want delivered in the next sprint. The Agile Manifesto originated in the software industry for their software development process. It was developed as a solution to create greater engagement of stakeholders, in particular the customer user. The aim of Agile is more frequent and early delivery of useful and usable software for the customer user, thus improving the realized value for all stakeholders and radically reducing time and cost overruns and dissatisfaction with the process and the software delivered. In effect, it's addressing some of the issues associated with a plan-driven approach. The key values for Agile relate to changing the emphasis and attitude of the stakeholders. These would be cultural and process values, where individuals and interactions are viewed as more important than following rigid process or using specific tools, where the delivery of comprehensive working software is more important than detailed and comprehensive documentation, where the stakeholders, customer and provider in particular, collaborate to get the shared goal delivered over negotiate and waste time on contract negotiations. Finally, responding to change and being agile about change rather than rigidly following a plan. Agile techniques can be applied to most projects, initiatives, and activities, not just the software development process. We introduce the important concept of a minimum viable product. Early delivery of usable and valuable output from the initiative is a priority, in particular the first release. The idea being that we're not waiting until every feature or every aspect of the output is ready before the customer can experience and use the output. But early in the project process, the customer and the provider agree the priority features that can be produced early and have a practical value for the customer, thus focusing on the first minimum viable product release. Here are some key Agile principles. Customer engagement and satisfaction with both the process and the delivered output for each sprint. Usable and useful output frequently delivered in days and weeks rather than in months and years. Regular communications and collaboration amongst the stakeholder team. Sustainable capability to deliver frequent and usable output for each sprint across the timeline of the overall initiative. Regular reflection by all stakeholders to improve performance of the Agile process. Let us review how a sprint operates. We start with the backlog of needs outlined in our user stories. We select and prioritize the user stories to be included in the next sprint within the sprint cost and time constraints. The delivery team works on the sprint priorities. On completion of the sprint, the deliverable outputs are reviewed and released if they meet the minimum viable product criteria. Key learning from the sprint is fed into the process. This could lead to new or changed user stories. The process is then repeated for the next sprint. Key properties of the sprint are priorities, the objective of each user story, the cycle, the capacity, the output, the value, metrics, organization, and momentum. You can read through these. Now let us consider the investment value indicator over the timeline of the initiative for the Agile adaptive approach. We use the sprint analogy here versus the marathon analogy that applies to the traditional plan-driven predictive approach. Here we use a series of short rapid sprints. The stakeholder team execute the first sprint process. On completion of early sprints, the stakeholder team, which includes the customer, may decide there's insufficient usable and useful value in the output to meet the minimum viable product criteria, but this is not always the case. We repeat the process in sprint 2. In sprint 3, in this example, we produce output that meets the minimum viable product criteria. The customer accepts a release into operations and starts to use and experience value from the output. Sprint 4 repeats the process. In sprint 5, in this example, we have additional useful and usable value, so it gets released. Generally, in the later sprints, they tend to get released, where they have incremental usable and useful enhancements for the customer. The final sprint in this example, when accepted, indicates success and customer expectations have been met or exceeded, normally within the anticipated timeline and budget. So, in conclusion, for the traditional plan-driven predictive approach, the scope for what is to be delivered is fixed, and its cost and time adjusted to deliver on that scope. However, for the agile adaptive approach, it is the cost and time that are fixed for each sprint, and it's the scope of what gets delivered that is adjusted to meet the time and cost constraints. Thanks for your attention. I hope you found this video useful and informative. Below you can see other videos in the digital series. If you need any further information, you can go to the listed websites, or you can email me at info@intelligentorg.com. Thank you again.